everybody. It is the Working Brother back at you with another talk. This time we've got Matt Ehret. That is how you pronounce it. Is that right, Matt?
That's perfectly good. Yeah.
All right. Matt, who is from the Canadian Patriot Press. Is that also correct?
That is also correct.
All right. Thank you for coming on, taking time to bless our audience with your presence and vast knowledge. You do many different things in your career. Could you enlighten the audience as to who exactly you are and what it is you do?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for having me on. I was looking forward to this conversation all week, and I know we actually scheduled a couple of moments while I was just in Japan a couple of weeks back, and things just didn't work out with time differences. So anyway, I'm glad we're finally making it happen.
Yeah.
To answer that question, yeah, amongst the main hats that I tend to wear is, as you pointed out, editor-in-chief of Canadian Patriot Review, an online journal that I set up in 2012 in order to deal with certain questions for specifically an audience in Canada that provided, I found that there was a vacuum of analysis that failed to take into consideration Canada's role as a geopolitical plaything of empire. So whether or not it was our historic role as a tool of the British Empire, carrying out assassinations of presidents that are coordinated from Anglo-Canadian operations in Montreal or Toronto or Halifax, or whether it was the Canadian banking system, how it is enmeshed in the global international financial apparatus, or whether it was just our role belligerently provoking war with Russia in the Arctic, even going back to the days of Stephen Harper. There was just a lack of discussion and analysis taking that into consideration. So that's where I created the news magazine. And out of that research, I published a few books. First on Canadian history, 4 volumes of the Untold History of Canada series, after piecing together what is this weird phenomenon known as Canada, going back to 1774, even when there were the original efforts to encourage the Canadian patriots to take part in the Declaration of Independence. That was going to be still another 2 years into the future, but Benjamin Franklin was up here. There's a lot of organizing effort to do that, and due to various reasons that I go through in the book series, that failed to happen. Canada remained an integral part of the empire, and it was only the southern 13 colonies that declared independence. And so we reconstructed all of history, taking into consideration the existence of these oligarchical hereditary structures. And the 4 volumes sort of served as sort of a guideline of a new evaluation of history that I found to be of high value in my broader geopolitical appreciation for the battlefield of the Arctic, the fight against depopulation, both in the present and in the past. So the other 4 books that I've authored more recently, with my wife, Cynthia, who is an author at Strategic Culture Foundation with me for about 3 years, is called The Clash of the Two Americas, which again tells the tale of how the deep state originated, what were the patriots in America, who were the American presidents or secretaries of state in some cases throughout the 19th century and into the 20th, who were assassinated, who were overthrown by this fifth column that had always been loyal to the city of London in America and still is today, to this very day. I am also the senior fellow at the American University in Moscow, run by a nuclear physicist named Dr. Edward Lazansky, as another little hat that I wear, more of a think tank geopolitical analysis platform. And finally, the last big hat that I think is important would be I'm a co-founder of the Rising Tide Foundation, which I co-started with my wife in 2019 as a small nonprofit, but that's devoted to intercultural and intercivilizational understanding, dialogue, and research. So that's the main thing, yeah.
So from historical perspectives to current trends to psychological stuff, you cover it all, basically.
Yeah, I mean, not all, but we try to keep a wide lens at the world.
That's
Yeah.
good. That's good. Many people these days get a little tunnel vision and a little too focused into
Yeah.
all kinds of topics that they're into, and forget to look at the bigger picture of how all these different trades, let's say, interact. Full disclosure: I've actually been to Canada. I went to Ryerson for a year, did technical theater, failed, and left. But yeah,
Technical theater.
technical theater, lighting, sound, all that kind
Oh,
of
okay, right.
direction,
Okay,
and all that other stuff.
okay.
But yeah, I failed, so like it doesn't count. The point is, I've been to Canada. Toronto is a very interesting city, very cold. Where in Canada are you based?
Little farming village just outside of Montreal, about a
Outside of
45-minute
Montreal.
drive
Ça veut dire que tu
south.
parles
Yeah.
français encore?
Oui, oui, je peux débrouiller en français. Et vous aussi. Ah, c'est incroyable.
Oui, oui, je parle français un peu. Yeah,
From
but let's.
Toronto, they made you had to pick up French in Toronto?
No. I picked up French elsewhere in my
Okay.
long life and educational career. But
On a side note, as far as the fleshing out of technical theater, I was also in university studying fine arts and
mhm,
film cinema, but it was experimental cinema, experimental fine arts cinema, and
mhm,
I also washed out of that. I was in it for 2 years, and well,
yeah,
first I did a degree in CEGEP. That's sort of like this weird, not quite middle school, not quite university system that they have in Quebec only. It's a weird thing.
mhm.
So I did what's called a technical degree in illustration and design, and that was fine. It gives you certain, at least
Background, yeah.
rigorous, good habits of not being sloppy with your approach to art. A lot of that's fine. But then I was like, okay, I want to express myself a little bit more freely. So I went to university at Concordia
Mhm,
in fine arts and film animation. But it was such a unnatural, sick philosophy of arts that was pervasive in the department, and all of the teachers, the chair people of the department were all radical, ideologically driven, postmodernist, anti-humanists philosophically, and their ideal of aesthetic was decay. That was their
mhm,
ideal, and it really permeated everything. And to the point that I felt myself, in order to pass the tests or to do the projects and get the marks, I had to I was finding myself deconstructing who I was in order to make my work more ugly, more unintelligible, more
mhm.
so-called artistically acceptable.
Yeah.
And I was like, nah, I'm doing damage to my soul on some level. And I didn't understand politics. I didn't quite understand cultural warfare. So I didn't know where this was coming from, but I knew that was sick. And I was like,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
gotta remove myself from this environment. And I went my own way at that point.
Um, yeah, no, I just partied, and the thing is that like I failed some of my exams and whatnot, and then I kept showing up to class, and the teachers kept accepting the grades and marking my stuff and whatever, and they didn't even tell me that like I had already technically failed. You know what I mean? So like
They're
I
like,
had
hey, he wants to pay the money, let him pay the money.
basically, yeah. But no, the thing that got me about Canada was that it's supposed to be the nicer version of the U.S., as in like people are supposed to be more friendly and open, let's put it that way. And after let's say a year of going to the same corner store or 7-Eleven to get my cigarettes and groceries and whatnot, the three workers there greeting you like it's the first time they met you, it got to me because like I don't know, you've been around the world and I'm sure you know that like in the East, if you like go to the same corner store 3 times in a row, the fourth time you're likely to get stuff on credit. If you forget your wallet, it's like not a problem. You know what I mean? Like come back later.
Yeah.
Um, so you've been to Japan recently. Was that educational or was that on holiday?
Well, it was a business pleasure. Obviously, yeah, it was very educational in some ways. every time you go to a new civilization, you meet a new culture on the ground. It's always going to be an educational experience. We originally went for some business meetings, and there's a publisher that reached out to us and offered to translate our books into Japanese and publish them on the Japanese market. So that was a great opening. So you do have a lot of Japanese who are very unhappy with the fact that they're being set up to be cannon fodder and potentially as expendable as the Ukrainians are in the middle of this, oncoming clash between the U.S. military-industrial complex and both Russia and China on the Pacific side. And so there's a lot of openness to ideas that could offer some sort of a pathway through the storm. So that was a nice thing. We also had a team that was meeting up to arrange some ideas for a series of videos, documentaries on understanding China, understanding how the Pacific is being played. So that was another thing we were doing. And culturally, yeah, I mean, some of the nicest people I ever met in my life were in Japan. And I mean, the level of just etiquette and going above and beyond the call of duty as far as just a regular civilian. Like we got lost a few times, and when I would ask just a regular civilian just walking down the street, hey, how do I get to this place? And we had like a little picture of what we wanted to see, or we had an address. Obviously we couldn't communicate very well in the Japanese language, but they were able to go out of their way, not only to plug it into their phone, but to walk us significantly far outside of their own, whatever they were doing. They walked us like 15, 20 minutes to get us closer to our destination. And just things like that. There was just, and Canada it's very different in many ways, because Canada is known as being the polite society. We're so polite. We're so nice. And there is a certain politeness and niceness on some level
I'm sorry,
in Canada.
but you are, eh?
We are, yeah. And we will say sorry, even if we are in Canada. Yeah, if a Canadian hits an American. And actually, there's this weird case where I was driving with an American friend not that long ago in Ottawa, and my American friend is driving the car, and he hits the car in front of us. Not too hard, but enough to do a little bit of damage to the guy in front of us. The guy in front of us gets out of his car, and my friend is from New York. He's thinking he's going to get into a fight. The guy comes up to us and says, "Oh, I'm so sorry, eh?" It's like, wait a minute. It was our fault. We did that too.
He's sorry for braking so hard.
I guess so. Yeah. And it ended with no signing of any papers or anything. So that was interesting. But overall, you tend to get a bit of a passive aggressive culture. So there's a lot of like bubbling anger and rage in the subconscious of a lot of Canadians who have sort of the
internalized everything.
If it does come, it doesn't come from their heart, huh?
They've internalized everything. They've like suppressed it, basically.
Yeah, they've been obedient to empire. It's a society that has never really fought for freedom, and that's, we're told, is part of what makes us great. Is we've never had to fight for things.
What about the Honk? What about the Honk episode with the truckers?
Well, that's interesting.
Can we even talk about Alberta. That? Are you allowed to talk about that?
So far, I'm still allowed to talk about that.
Yeah, they're not going to like turn off your bank account or something.
Yeah, no, I was not one of the people who got their bank accounts frozen, but that was a thing. Now, the interesting thing is Canada did something in February of last year that was remarkable. I think everyone knows about this. That the spark for that was primarily the blue collar workers who are being sacrificed really clearly in Alberta. The last 2.5, 3 years were devastating on the blue collar, especially people who work in the natural gas and oil fields, where the death cult green ideologues who are occupying positions of high power in Ottawa are ideologically, religiously committed to shutting down industrial civilization, with the target being decarbonization as the euphemism. And there's a complete war on farming, on agriculture, and specifically also on hydrocarbons in general. And a big chunk of Canada's economy comes from, mining, or basically our hydrocarbon market, specifically oil and natural gas. And Alberta is the primary force of that. The prairies also, a lot of blue collar people who are farmers there who are also being targeted. Canada is committing itself to shutting down food production by 30% by 2030, according to some of these stupid computer models that are being fed to our governing class from Davos. So obviously, the farmers and the oil workers, they did the most, specifically in the trucking community, to organize a very, very potent resistance in the form of the Trucker Freedom Convoy. And it created sort of that spark plug created a space where people who were suffocating in fear, feeling like they were these isolated lone islands, we're all of a sudden able to realize, well, I'm not alone. All over Ontario, all over Quebec, the Maritimes, there's people who all of a sudden realized, oh my God, I'm actually not isolated. And there's over 7 or 8 million Canadians who all, in varying degrees, either came to Ottawa or did parallel protests against the lockdowns in their own provinces. So that was a real breath of fresh air. And you can't shut that down. People who work in the real world and aren't just living in ivory towers in Davos, they have to feed their kids. They have to live in the world, and they know they have, even though they're not intellectual, they didn't go through academia, they have more access to reality and reason and morality because they live in the world and they have to feed their kids, right? So they responded like any human would when you put them underwater and you tell them to breathe water for too long. They're like, no, I'm going to breathe oxygen. So they fought for breath. And it was catchy. So we're hoping more of that can happen. But you also need leadership too. That's one of the things that are lacking, is that both the mass bottom up, but also top down. You have to have some sort of synergy, and from the leadership side of things to give shape and direction to the mass movement. There's a big lack, obviously, in Canada.
I just want to be clear.
I haven't seen really,
because it's your first time. I just want to be clear because it's your first time. This is a comedy show. And any resemblance to reality is purely coincidental. We don't condone any calls to action. There's like nothing, like this is just a comedy show, and we're just discussing jokes that we heard from random people. It has nothing to do with reality. The worst comedy show on YouTube. Yeah, no, I was gonna get into Canadian Nazis, but you already kind of brought it up, and the COVID dictatorship. So we might as well get into it now. Canada went full, I don't know if fascist is maybe the more correct term, considering it is like, oh, did you freeze? Oh, no, you didn't. Okay.
No, I'm just not moving.
Yeah, so Canada during the COVID lockdowns went full hardcore, almost as bad as Australia. Do you think that is a remnant of the, like you say, colonial mentality? Or do you think that's just they've been having fluoride in their water for too long?
First of all, are you broadcasting this to YouTube or to?
This will go on to YouTube. Yeah. It's gonna be uploaded to YouTube.
So I do have to be a little bit careful.
Yeah, but it's we'll see. I have less than 1,000 subscribers, so like I'm not even, I'm far below the radar for now. No. Yeah.
Yeah, see, my YouTube channel is getting targeted, so I'm getting like little hits telling me, a video I posted a year and a half ago is just gotten me a strike, and I'm in the, one more strike, I'm going to be canceled completely. And I've been working hard. I even cleansed like 80% of my video content. I cleansed it from the past 4 years. I just erased it because I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to give them a reason. And they're still trying. They're still working hard at it. So I'm feeling like it's only a matter of time before mine's taken down. But I'm still gonna try to be not stupid in my words. Yeah, Canada. I think I could say this. Yeah, it is correct to draw a parallel to fascism, for sure, to what's been going on, specifically in Canada, but more broadly. Across the whole transatlantic, and especially the Five Eyes.
And just to be clear, define fascism in the, like, let's say, economic sense in this case, because like it is, because Pfizer is a private company, so in that sense, it's government and
there's a few different definitions of fascism. The one that I think applies most here is the integration of private interests and government agencies on the behalf and benefit of those very private interests who are not representatives of the interests of the people or the state. and will then use their influence within every government mechanism that they can to get to achieve their ends and goals, which usually runs completely contrary to the actual well-being and interests of the citizens who make up the legitimate part of any national government. So as soon as you get that integration, you've got the corporate fascism of Mussolini. I mean, there's different variants and flavors that we see of it, whether Franco or Nazi Germany had its own flavor to it. But there's certain common themes. I think that the best one is any system of government which does not differentiate between human beings and lower animals. And if you don't make that differentiation and you treat human beings just like another form of animal from the biosphere, or monkey or cow, if that's your qualitative definition of a human, then you will act like a zookeeper, and you will use behaviorist, probes and prods of reward and punishments, and also whatever you can to behaviorally modify the comportment of those people, who will willfully then live in a little concentration camp that gets smaller and smaller on behalf of an elite above who doesn't really care about them, and in fact might even hate them.
15-minute cities, in a word.
15-minute cities where you're kind of eating bugs in 15-minute cities. Yeah, that's the thing. You have the whole idea of freedom is thereby, I've got my freedom to receive my little credit because of my good behavior that allows me to buy my bugs in a 15-minute bike ride from my house. That's my freedom. My freedom is to get my suicide pill and use it when I want to, and maybe whatever psilocybin taxpayer funded psilocybin I can get using my credits as well, maybe to make
was George Orwell's 1984
bearable.
Was George Orwell's 1984 mandatory reading in your high school?
It wasn't from my class, but it was in my high school. We got Brave New World, Aldous Huxley.
Okay.
That was our big thing.
Okay.
What about you?
We did 1984, and we did also Lord of the Flies.
We did Lord of the Flies too.
Yeah.
We also did Catcher in the Rye, Halden Caulfield's story of J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye.
Mm-hmm. What can I say? Yeah. They tried hard to get everything.
Well, it was not a coincidence. Like the fact that a lot of this revolution in literature taught to kids in high school who don't even have critical thinking, who are very malleable. They have not developed mature critical thinking yet. The fact that they were being given all of these really hardcore existential nihilistic predictive programming material in their English courses really came about as the consequence of Julian Huxley's overseeing of UNESCO. And his work also with people like Sir Alexander King at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development that oversaw transformation of school systems.
Sounds like Russian propaganda. What you're saying sounds like the Russian propaganda.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, this is a lot. Yeah, this is another thing. Yeah, but all the stuff went in. That's when this was brought in. We were told you don't have to read, Homer and Plato and the dead white European males anymore. That's obsolete. You don't have to study Greek or Latin. That's obsolete. You just need to read, relevant modern thinkers who speak to the ugliness of our times. That's going to equip young people to be part of the world. And so, it made it very easy to condition young baby boomers and then the generations that came after them to think that the future is shaped by the sorts of things that Orwell writes about, or that Huxley writes about, or, Fahrenheit 451 as well as another one, that all have a sort of idea that the future is this dystopian thing, and there's nothing you can really do about it except to try to maybe adapt or get ahead, be one of the alphas or alpha pluses, maybe, in that system, but don't resist it.
Nazis, they come up often these days. One of them is that Canadian lady, let's put it that way, who has a grandfather, I believe it is. Or is it a father or a grandfather? Grandfather.
Michael Chomiak.
Who worked under some German general, was it? Propaganda chief? Editor of some newspaper, something like that? And she's one of the people, Friesland, I believe is her last name. Is that correct?
sounds like. Yeah, very close.
She's one of the people that's in charge of demilitarizing Canada, as in sending weapons to Ukraine. How do you feel as a Canadian, being the per capita biggest donor of, that news came out recently. I saw that somewhere. Per capita, you guys have donated the most to Ukraine. How do you feel about that?
I noticed that on Joaquin's feed.
I don't know who that is. I don't know who that is. That's like some person who doesn't exist.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Some interesting anonymous Telegram feed that has nothing to do with the name Joaquin. Total coincidence. There was that graph that was put out. I thought Joaquin who likes flowers. So, that was an interesting graph. I'm not surprised, I guess, overall, but it did demonstrate that even though the overall quantity of money given to support the turning of Ukraine into basically a giant expendable piece of cannon fodder is quantitatively the largest from the United States. Per capita, Canada is number one, and the fact that our particular deputy prime minister, handler of young idiot Justin, is herself very enmeshed through both her family traditions as well as the actual integrated machinery that is very much tied to I'm trying to say this in ways that won't get this canceled on YouTube. Very bad things in Ukraine. Andre Perubi is a close friend, has been here many times to Ottawa, being wined and dined. That's not a coincidence. And there was a particular newspaper that was formerly Jewish owned in Ukraine. Not a bad newspaper originally, but the problem is that those owners ended up in a concentration camp, and the entire printing press that they'd formerly owned and ran in Ukraine was given to a certain figure by the name of Michael Chomiak, who worked very closely for about 4 years with very bad people in Berlin to promote Goebbels' propaganda and essentially help corral and organize and round up the Untermenschen of the Slavs, the Jews, the Poles, killing well over 90,000, probably way more than that as well, throughout the course of the war. And after the war, a lot of these figures, Mikhail Lebed, who was a leading figure of the Organization for Ukrainian Nationalists, was not only not punished, neither were people like Stefan Bandera, another figure of another branch of the OUN, but they were absorbed into the CIA and MI6 operations. Chomiak was given a nice little comfortable lifestyle in the prairies in Canada, where he was allowed to rehabilitate his family, along with many other Ukrainians who had a very, very bloody past during World War II, working with the Nazis. Many of them were given safe sanctuary to rehabilitate themselves and sort of just feed a new narrative of history that. And they were given Canada. Like, Canada was a major absorption center for most of those figures. And over the course of a few generations, Mykola Lebed, who worked for a particular front group tied to the CIA throughout the 1950s, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, he was assigned the task of rewriting history to make the Nazis seem like they were actually not really the bad guys in World War II. It was really the evil Stalinists of Russia who were the real bad guys. And this has just nurtured and incubated new generations, including Christia's mother, who played a big role in organizing the first color revolution in Ukraine. I mean, her mother was one of the authors of the Ukrainian Constitution in 2004, paid for by George Soros and the National Endowment for Democracy. This is not controversial what I'm saying. Books have been written on this. It's been proven. The documents are something anybody who's a researcher can just look at. So she gave this heritage to her daughter, who was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, had the right stuff, as they say, was deployed to to test her mettle in British intelligence operations, fronting as news agencies like Reuters, which is her early assignment. And that's a great excuse to get your agents onto different territory that you want to subvert, Russia being a big one, and that was her assignment for many years. And she, again, just demonstrated that she knew how to work her magic. She wasn't really bothered by pangs of I guess, what humans might call conscience. She became close friends with many of the leading oligarchs of Ukraine, of Russia, George Soros. It's weird, the network of friends that she accumulated in the 1990s and all the way up until her decision, or the decision was made for her to go into politics in 2013 and leave sort of that career of journalism behind. And when she did, a seat was made available for her by another Rhodes Scholar. And the Rhodes Scholars always play a key guiding hand throughout the entire 20th century. And everything bad that's happened, you'll tend to find a Rhodes Scholar or a nest of Rhodes Scholars usually behind anything bad, from the manufacturing of wars, coups, assassinations, both at home or abroad. Rhodes Scholars, very important factor to keep into consideration. And the Roundtable movement that organizes the Rhodes Scholarship zombies, very important dynamic to hold in mind. The Council on Foreign Relations just being one of many Rhodes Scholar or Roundtable
propaganda. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, it was what they would. That's exactly what they would say. Yes, but it's a fact. And even the Council on Foreign Relations admits that they were set up in 1919 as the branch of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, which itself was the Roundtable movement in Britain.
Next, you're going to tell me that the Bilderberg Group is real too. Like the Bilderberg Group exists, right? They even have a website. Sure, buddy. Well, they
might not have a website. Do the Bilderberg?
They do now. They do now.
They have a website?
They do now.
No, do they?
Yeah. After that last one in Canada, or like the one before that, they opened up a website. Like the one that Alex Jones went to in Switzerland that one year, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Are you checking their website?
Yeah, I can't believe this. Yeah, there it is. There it is. You called it. It's right there. There's a Bilderberger website.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They're out in the open. Everybody is now. That brings me conveniently to like a question that I ask all the guests, especially the new ones. Ukraine, Russia, proxy war or beginning of World War III? Have we begun World War III? Is World War III well in the works? Has it started already like 10 years ago? Or is it about to start?
Yeah, it's kind of like semantics in some ways. Like in terms of, it depends on how people define wars. But I think if we're honest and we define wars, which include also asymmetric wars, not just the old school, two great powers going tete-a-tete. The war with Russia, there was never an end to the Cold War. Like there was never the intention to destroy the Russian civilization as a civilizational entity never ended, even in 1991. That was just a successful battle in an ongoing war that didn't even end in 1945. Did World War II on a legally speaking, it did kind of end, but was it ever? I think of it when you look at what happened, what didn't happen after World War II. Well, those who brought us World War II, who wanted to turn Russia into a dismantled, balkanized slave colony, were never punished. The City of London financiers, the Wall Street financiers of fascism that wanted to take part in a global, Great Reset world government of depopulation and transhumanism back in the 30s, they weren't punished. George, Prescott Bush, the patron of the Bush family dynasty, was caught red-handed funding Hitler for Union Bank, and because he was found guilty, had Union Bank's assets stripped, and for the duration of the war, he was kind of taken out of any position of play. But right after the war, he was made a senator. His kids were granted huge privileges to become the chief of the CIA, and then a president, then another one, then another one. But that's just he's a lower guy on the totem pole, But a lot of the key backers financially, the intelligence agencies were never punished. The leading Nazis and the leading Italian fascists and the leading Japanese fascists, were never really punished at Nuremberg, but in fact were just absorbed, like Hiro Ishii's Unit 731 that ran the human experiments on living guinea pigs, killing over 60,000 people, Chinese, Russian, American POWs, civilians were killed en masse by these freaks, these Japanese Mengele's. They were absorbed into Fort Detrick, Maryland, and, you know, given a new mandate to be a part of the U.S. military-industrial complex in the 1950s, 60s, and beyond. We already mentioned, you know, Mykola Levitt and Bandera, who were absorbed into Western Anglo-American intelligence. So in that sense, the intention to destroy Russia, destroy China, ultimately destroy America itself from within, which is what great presidents have always resisted whenever they would die in office, from JFK to Roosevelt to Warren Harding to McKinley to Lincoln to Garfield to, I mean, look what they're doing. They're all fighting against the exact same fascist deep state fifth column inside of the United States, masquerading as you know, patriotic Wall Street banks, which are never did they represent the interests of Americans. All that to say, World War II didn't really end. It was the success of a battle that put down a Frankenstein monster, but the war didn't really end. The intention never went away. And especially after 1991, it went on, it shifted gears into a new level of intensity, which peaked, I guess, with the 70s, 1997, 98, you know, efforts of those who were handling or managing the Yeltsin administration to completely break apart Russia into, again, these little micro federations under the control of the IMF and local controlled oligarchs who would be beholden and loyal to Wall Street and London as their masters, you know, little house slaves. That intention to bring that back online didn't end when Putin was brought into play as a troubleshooter to start correcting the vast self-mutilating errors of the 90s. And so there's been ongoing asymmetrical warfare, probably biological warfare. I'm sure we'll find more and more evidence as things come to the surface. China as well has seen an ongoing intention to bring back the 1980s, when George Soros had a huge governing control of China and wanted to use China as the forever slave plantation for Western cheap goods under a local control network of billionaires loyal to Davos. That was the idea to bring that 1970s, 80s design back into play has been ongoing and nonstop, to the point that they're willing to launch nuclear war now if Russia and China don't return back to the script that they were supposed to never have left back in the 90s. So in that sense, yeah, there's I think the war is on, but it's not the type of war that people think of.
So now that we're living in World War III on low settings, multipolarity. Tell me your take on the changing world and the financial changes that have been happening, first of all, in the, like, you know, international monetary systems, and then after that, how diplomacy and the, you know, peacemaking of people like Iran and Saudi Arabia are showing the weaning effects of U.S. diplomacy in the world stage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the U.S. dollar is going to collapse, and I think everybody has been everybody who's in a position to think about this and are just looking at the variables that have been holding together this Titanic that has systemic ruptures that have been there for a long time. They know that this is just a question of when it's going to collapse, not if it's going to collapse. And so there's been, and this is not something that just emerged out of like the pandemic age. This is something that was already being looked at a decade ago, 2 decades ago, even longer in some places for some astute observers. Glaziev has been on the record since the 90s, basically warning that the United States could not sustain the type of programming that they selected for themselves even as early as the 70s, of creating a debt-based society that would consider, under a deregulated fashion, greater degrees or greater amounts of debts as themselves assets in banks that would then be speculated upon insured again, speculated upon over the insurance, called derivatives. That was intrinsically designed to fail. It had the seeds of its own self-annihilation built into the programming. Because, you know, it's like blowing a Hubba Bubba bubble gum. You know, we all love those bubble gums, and they make really big bubbles. But, you know, no matter what you do, you might, based on the intensity of air you're blowing into the bubble gum, there's a certain
limit
chemistry in the thing itself that will only allow it to grow to a certain point by the laws of physics before it blows up in your face.
Yeah.
And that's what we did with the bubbles of that became the Western economy. Was just it became a bubble economy. We stopped producing real goods. We shut down our infrastructure. We don't have the means of production. All we produce is debt that we expect other people to buy in order to settle their balance of payments, you know, and somehow everyone who, the U.S. was very strong in the early 70s, economically much stronger than any other nation. So they were able to use their clout to convince everybody, or at least get the nations of the world to agree to settle their payments in the trade in U.S. dollars. So everyone had to have U.S. dollar reserves to maintain stability of their markets. And oil became one of the most important commodities of the world, obviously. So with the agreement in 73 that only U.S. dollars will be used to settle oil deals internationally, well, that made the U.S., which already was throwing its weight around a little bit too aggressively against poor countries that wanted to become independent and have the right to their own independent, full spectrum economic base. They were often overthrown or targeted by regime change. That was already being abused, the power of the U.S. economically before that, but there was still some viability in the U.S. Before the 70s. You know, Bobby Kennedy, before that, John F. Kennedy, were trying to restore or amplify the good component of the pro-capitalist. And when I say capitalist, I don't mean speculation, but I mean the creation of capital. The idea that the private sector had to real things in the real world that were also going to benefit the nation and people as a whole, and not just a few, you know, wannabe, you know, gods of Olympus. So anyhow, this became something that was used to keep everybody on a leash, and everybody had to have US dollars. US dollars that were tied to speculation could then be used for economic terrorism by people like George Soros to speculate against currencies of a country under a floating exchange rate system, where it's just basically market demand that determine value and not reality. So that has made, I think, a lot of people, especially of the global South, but, you know, I mean, the nations working increasingly with the BRICS plus involve not just, you know, Egypt is getting on board increasingly. Argentina, Brazil is obviously a part of this thing since the get-go. South Africa jumped on board in 2011, a big economic engine of Africa. But, you know, you have Algeria, you got a lot of countries also with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization on the other branch of this multipolar new system coming online. And what makes this thing good, because, you know, there's some forms of multipolarity that are not intrinsically good. For example, you know, George Soros, he had his own definition of multipolarity that he liked, which simply involved regionalization of technocratic management under a governing class of Malthusians, like they did with NAFTA, to consolidate control under a corporate elite that would then be themselves controlled by a Davos type of death cult ideologue grouping, or the European Union, which was like a regional control that got rid of the national sovereign rights of nations to have control of their own economies. George Soros, Henry Kissinger, they like that type of multipolarity where you have like regional controls like that, maybe an African Union under the control of a Malthusian elite, a Eurasian Union controlled under the control of an IMF-directed Malthusian elite. Same thing for South America. They like that. So that has been something fought over. But the type that we're actually seeing being brought online right now is premised around a rejection of the Malthusian logic for depopulation and world government. That's different. So the monetary system that we see coming out of China with their ability to control their state banks that they never permitted be privatized has demonstrated an ability to pull over 1 billion people out of poverty in only 25 years. And they've almost completely eliminated poverty in their own country in China, and they're exporting their development model, building high-speed rail development corridors.
But they're suppressing the Uyghurs.
Yeah, then you get things like that. Yeah, Yeah, it's a Uyghur. They're doing genocide against their Muslim population, which is interesting because if you look at the facts, the Uyghur population over the last 40 years has increased its longevity by a factor. They've gone from a 48-year average life expectancy.
Chinese propaganda. Chinese propaganda.
This even IMF even acknowledges on their demographic statistics too. This is the funny thing. You can go there and they actually acknowledge that there's been an average increase of life expectancy to the point that it's even about to supersede American life expectancy, which has fallen down to 69.7 years of age. The U.S. average life now, it's fallen down 2 years under COVID. Uyghurs has only increased. Their population has doubled. They've never had any one-child policy limit, which was only done to the Han Chinese, which was always a bad idea. But the point is, it's the most ineffective genocide ever. If you define genocide as the killing of a people, this is the most incompetent genocide by all intents and purposes. They got faster internet in Xinjiang than I have in my part of southern Montreal. You know, like they have high-speed rail. You can get on a high-speed rail in Xinjiang and go to any of the neighboring cities in Xinjiang on high-speed rail. There's zero high-speed rail in Canada, which is still using 1953 technology for their rail systems in Canada, where I live, the developed part of the world. So it's like
the West, yeah.
Anyway, that's the thing. So it's an anti-Malthusian approach to multipolarity premised around a respect for the sovereignty of nations, the right of non-military interference, as the UN Charter outlines, which is very different from the rules-based international order, which is entirely based on humanitarian military interventions under responsibilities to protect, advanced by Tony Blair and Kissinger.
You mean
it's very different,
do
logic.
what thou wilt, but in diplomatic speak.
The whole of the lie, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I think that sums up this first little segment. I've decided now officially that we're going to cut it short here, 46 minutes in, and we are going to come back with a part 2. We have a lot more to talk about with Matt. Matt, thank you for coming on. Do you have anything to say to people as we play some music for the outro?
No, see you all at part 2.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around. See you soon.